And good afternoon, good evening. Hi, my name is Ann McNeil, and I am the Master Wealth Builder, helping you to build a stronger and better life and business, and a volunteer with Better Investing. And Ione McNeil and myself are hosting this show entitled hashtag My Investing Story. And our special guest tonight, as we talk about investing in yourself and investing in your community, is none other than Mr. Damon A. Williams. But telling you a little bit about the organization, Better Investing is a not for profit 501c3 nonprofit organization that helps individual investors with educational products and services. And we're all volunteers, so we're not selling anything, but helping us to learn how to analyze stocks and how to invest. And so, with that, I'd like to introduce and reintroduce my co host, Miss Ione McNeil, who's going to interview our guest. Ione?
Hello, hello.
Hey there.
How you doing, Damon?
I'm doing well, all things considered. I'm grateful to be alive and to be in this conversation with y'all.
Well, I did want to start off today's session with a moment of silence,
Mhm.
just to restore peace in our hearts and peace in our minds for what's going on. So let's take a moment of silence. Okay, I'm glad I breathed through that. So let's get into the fun part. Let me just introduce you from my memory, right?
Mhm.
What's interesting is that you are like, to me, and I think this is my first time ever telling you this, but I feel like we are kindred spirits, almost
Mhm.
like the male and female version of the same person, because
Mhm.
because you were the only other person that I knew from 20 something years ago that had an identical um, start in investing. We both started when we
Mhm.
were 7. We both had like the aha moment about Nike stock. We both got into that just from observation, from
Mhm.
our mothers both exposing us to the world of investing and all of that. So, with that being said, I've always, kept an eye on you, even
Mhm.
from afar. I've always been in Miami. You've always been in Chicago, but seeing you in the news, in magazines about the work that you did and have been doing has been amazing. In fact, I'm glad I'm just now remembering this. You were featured in Time magazine.
Yeah.
I saw the article before I flew to Senegal about 2 weeks ago because of your new career. And
Mhm.
with that being said, we'll get into more about that. But I did just want to say that to give people a sense of my view of you. And I'm going to ask you the same question I ask everybody, which is how did you come to invest?
Mhm.
What was the money relationship like for you in your childhood and in your home?
Mhm. Mhm. So I'm gonna thank you for having me here. This is a beautiful platform. I'm in love with like the family spirit and ethos of this. It does feel very much kindred, and I'm honored and humbled to be here, particularly on such a heavy day. And to that answer, like my story with money, I'm gonna give a brief, like small, silly version, and then give like the real story. So at a very young age, I had a love of money and particularly like dollars specifically. My dad's an entertainer and performer, so he works in a cash business. So I really love like seeing money and seeing cash. And so at a young age, like seeing hundreds of dollars was like the thing for me. So one of my first memories with money is I was maybe 4 or 5 years old. I had a birthday party, and my grandfather, who was a showerer, was a gift giver, gave me a $100 bill, and I didn't recognize it as $100. I was like, okay, thanks. And then the next year, maybe if I was 4, I was 5. If I was 3, then I was 4, something like that. He came with a stack of 100 singles. And I thought I was rich. And so at a little 4 or 5 years old, I tried to walk around everywhere with these 100 singles in my pocket and counting them every day and budgeting it out. Didn't have nothing I wanted to buy at the time, candy, whatever, but really felt like something. So that's something that like kind of opened something in me, and I think also opened a recognition of my mother, because at the same time she was going through a transformation that she wanted to instill in her children. And so I think that's part of the story we'll get into, but I'll talk about like what she started with me. So at that time, I was also growing a love for money and basketball. So I thought I was gonna be a basketball player so I could make a lot of money. And I'm born in 92, so I'm a 90 Chicago baby. So that means, was in love with Jordan. And the Nike marketing machine did a really amazing job of creating this mythical figure, this aspirational Black man with which we all want to be like. And if you bought his shoes, you could fly, you could be superhuman. And I was hook, line, and sinker to that marketing work. And so as an intervention, what my mother challenged was, before you get a pair of Nike shoes, you have to save up and own a share of Nike stock. And so that was the origin. And at the time, in the Better Investing model, she was starting a youth investment club out of the investment club that she had built with like some of her girlfriends. And this youth investment club was a traveling club where all the young people had their own portfolio. So we didn't have to have the like tension of voting, or, young people are a little bit more transient. So if you had to go to soccer or if your parents move, we didn't have to like liquidate because they had so much trouble with that as adults. So in 1999, my mother set up Ujamaa Jr. Ujamaa is an Americanized pronunciation of Ujamaa, which is Swahili for cooperative economics, one of the principles of Kwanzaa. And so by age 5, I had started learning about investing, was reading the youth material that NAIC used to give out. At the table, it was very much like, this is the type of mother that she saw herself in, a legacy that she wanted to pass down, because she felt she was not equipped to kind of navigate markets as an employee or as a consumer or as, capital markets. And so as she was educating herself, I, as a young person who can understand concepts well, articulate things, at age 5, 6, and 7, was in this youth club that was for like preteens and teenagers. So it was middle school age kids and high schoolers, and I'm first, second grade, learning about PE ratios, memorizing the 30 companies of the Dow, and talking about my portfolio and Nike stock, and how I'm not just a basketball player, but I'm an owner of the company, and I go inspect the bathrooms at McDonald's because I'm an owner. And this notion of ownership, because Ujamaa, as this cooperative economics, as a piece of how do we address what we were calling, no, actually said it, socioeconomic inequality. So as Black people, how can we equip ourselves to be able to address, inequity? And so that then put me in a position, because by age 9, I believe it was at a Better Investing conference, or an NAIC conference. I did a speech called The ABCs of Investing, that basically said, if I can do it, you can too. And laid out these very basic, like long-term, fundamental notions of how to study stocks, how to build a portfolio, how to be diversified, how to build wealth. And so from age 9 to about 2021, that was my work, or that was my ministry, most times for free or as a volunteer thing. Would go to other schools, would go to other investment clubs in the Midwest, would go to conferences, would go to churches, and talk about how we can, basically participate in the market as a way to address some of the inequity. And so that, I think I'll stop there. That is my entry point. And so I traveled my area, my community, talking about how we can build power through this. And so I want to get in this conversation with y'all as in a trusted way, because there are some like contradictions or some struggles that I've had. And so for the last 5 years or so in the work that I do, I haven't felt comfortable standing on the platform that I believe is amplifying a system. We can name it as racial capitalism or capitalism, that I think has been really harmful to Black people. And so I now want to like work or build through or pull out how these two tensions, and I'll stop here with, I went to school and studied economics and sociology, which I called socioeconomics, with the question of why do the North and South side of Chicago look and function so differently? Because I had this notion of sectors, institutions, market trends. I understood that systems were involved with how the economy works. And so as I began to then learn those systems, I now am in a place where I feel like we need to push from much more transformational approaches.
Yeah, and what university did you go to?
I went to Grinnell College. It's a liberal arts school in Iowa.
Okay.
Yeah.
And with you saying that you studied economics and
Sociology.
sociology.
Mm-hmm.
And right when you said it, it made me think about, I went to Howard and I studied accounting and Africana studies.
Yeah, very similar.
And those two worlds of awareness transformed myself. And as I hear from you, also transformed you. But in this point, and I'm glad you use this as your point of entry. A shout out to Dr. Carr and Karen Hunter for the class sessions that they're doing. I'm going to ask my mom if she has any questions from you, because from this point on, we're going to go on a roller coaster ride.
I so love that mom is here. This is, I wish I should have called my mom. I wish I recognized
Oh,
that this is what this was.
yeah.
Listen,
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
listen,
Oh, yeah.
listen. I want the world to know I was there when you did that presentation. I was in the
Wow.
audience. How about that?
Wow.
And I
Wow.
just recognized who you are after 20 years.
Yes, exactly. Right.
Goodness gracious. Because when you said Ujama, I said, I know that club. That was our first
Exactly.
introduction to a black
Exactly.
club when Ione
Yep.
was 9.
Yep.
Mm,
And that's you. Oh, you
yeah.
have got to call your mom. Yeah, text her and
Yeah,
say,
you should
"Mom,
text your mom right
like
now,
Yeah,
like
listen,
yeah.
have a hop on.
like Les Brown said when he was when he was going on the radio, he said he called his mom and his girlfriend and said, "Look, listen, y'all get the radio, come outside. I'm getting ready to go on the air." So call your mom and say, "Mom, you got to log in. I'm getting ready to go on the air on Zoom."
Mhm,
This
mhm,
is phenomenal. But you know what? There's something that's intentional when you come from a place of authenticity, and all things still do work together for good and they do come back full circle. And I don't believe in coincidences and chances. And so we created this show for exactly what you're going through, because you're going to go through this to the other side, right? Because you had to start where you were, you had to be here, and only God knows where what 20 years from now will have you. But one of the things that Ione and I are realizing, and a lot of people that look like us in the same journey that you're experiencing, but in a different way, is that everybody has an investing story.
mhm,
Everybody. But we didn't have a platform to share that story. I don't care if you're white, black, green, yellow, orange. Everybody has a story. But
mhm.
for us, like you said, the South Side versus the East or West, whatever side, all of our cities have that same story.
Right.
But if I choose to empower others with my voice and my energy, I give them power.
Mhm,
I choose to empower myself with the knowledge and the wisdom and the understanding, and ensure that I learn how, not just how to make the money, but learn how to make money, and then share that information with people that look like us. That is
mhm,
why we created this platform. That is why we're sharing this information to the least lost and the unconcerned. It may not happen in our generation, right? But this is evergreen. This information is evergreen. And so, what we're looking forward to is an opportunity to have it disseminated throughout the world, because as we know, Zoom is everywhere, and all we have to do is take the podcast and just continue to share it. So I'll just share. Those are my comments, and I'm just gonna put my seatbelt on,
mhm,
and
mhm.
I'll buckle up and just get ready for the ride.
Yeah. I appreciate you so much. So much love. So
No,
much love.
absolutely.
I got all Black mothers have a real place in my heart. So thank you for your
Absolutely,
work.
absolutely. Listen, I am really honored, and we can talk about this off the program, but I would love to find out whatever happened to those other kids that were in the club. We should look at maybe doing a reunion or something. We are planning a financial empowerment seminar in May, and it will be on Zoom. In addition to participating with the Better Investing annual conference, once that date is set, probably in the fall, once COVID settles down. But nevertheless, we would love to have that conversation and see how we can strategically, because it's all about better investing, and it's all about that was then, this is now, but what does the future hold as we bring this information of financial empowerment to everybody? All right.
Yeah, I think I got to keep it succinct because I have things coming in my head.
Yeah, it's an
Oh, I don't
intense
know.
day.
Yeah, very intense. And not even just from the day, but just some other things that came. I got elected to, well, I should say nominated and elected to the BI board in October.
Oh,
So
congratulations.
thank you. So we have something, I don't know if you probably didn't see this press release, but December 1st, NASDAQ sent a press release out in regards to mandating every company that is on their exchange to have a diverse board. At least 2 seats have to be of for white women or someone of Black, or they call it minority, or LGBTQ. And that is new, and because of the position that I'm in, I was aware of that. And so we have that on one hand. We have this thing that happened today on the other hand at the Capitol, at Capitol Hill. But before we go into there, because I know you're going to address both, I want to ask that transition question of,
Mhm.
how did you come from knowing what you knew about money and investing and the power that it gives us individually and also collectively, especially certain groups that are collective investors, and so they are building wealth collectively. Um, how do you go from that to community organizing? That's one. The second thing I do want to ask too is, because in my head, one of the reasons why I've decided or am still running in this lane is because, and I this could be a myth. I leave it to you to check me on that if
Mhm.
possible. But in my head, I was thinking and hoping, wishing and wanting that aspect of ownership, stock ownership, owning a share of a company from a mass community perspective will allow us the certain leverage that we wouldn't have if we were just on the outside. For example, um, you have a corporation in your community and you want to raise money as a nonprofit. It's one thing to go to that corporation and say, hey, can you give to our great cause? It's another thing to be all share owners and from the top down say, hey, this is the type of giving that we want you to do, and we want to start, we want you to start it here in this community with these organizations. In my head, that's the kind of idealism I would like us to grow to. And that's why I see the power of investing, not just in the growing and the management of the money, but in that ownership, this a new paradigm for a lot of us as Blacks, but an ownership of a corporation perspective, even though it's a fractional, I mean, they have a lot of shares out there, but I'm just thinking transformation from that perspective. And I don't know if that's been spoken about, but I know that that's something that's been in my head for years. So
Yeah, I mean, I definitely want to affirm the spirit of that. That's something I've thought about as well. It's something in Ujamaa Junior. It's not active. My mom ran it, and then I co-ran it with her for 20 years. And so as of now, she has like retired and is doing other work. But that towards the end of the 20-year run was one of the things we were really trying to push. So like, for example, McDonald's is headquartered in Illinois. So one of the challenges of everyone in the club would be, can we invest in one share to then we can go and attend McDonald's as well as Walgreens annual shareholders meetings, which is the thing I did as a young child. But I think this time starting to push towards how do we have a more grounded or principled approach and taking like some of that collective responsibility. Because one of the things I want to talk about extensively as we talk about corporations and investment and profit is about working people and labor. Because one of the things we thought about is like, for example, McDonald's workers everywhere, but particularly in Chicago, were demanding a $15 wage. And so if we are talking about the inequality or the poverty or the lack of access on the South and West side of Chicago or anywhere, you know, in Black America, like understanding that McDonald's and Walmart are the two biggest employers of Black people. And so how can, if folks are living in poverty, are working full-time and can't afford to feed their family, one, as owners or beneficiaries of that profit, of that wage suppression, what is our responsibility? Because these are our people being hurt. We don't have like the same relationship as 99% of shareholders who have a distance and maybe even an apathy to working people, to poor people, to Black people. And so for us, who our work is communal centered and empathetic, how do we do both is something that definitely we have questions. So I do affirm that, like, how do we organize to demand better things for our community, because corporations have the most power in America and in the world. In terms of my transformation, I think some of the seeds were probably planted in the '08 financial crisis. I was very much able to talk about recession as a shareholder and long-term, you know, this is actually an opportunity, right? Like the market will bounce back. I was able to abstractly talk about how the New York Stock Exchange can respond to price fluctuation, but that crisis had real consequence. Millions of people were pushed out of their homes and corporations benefited. And there was profit in this devastation that I'm getting emotional. I'm still seeing the violence. When you talk about Chicago violence, right? Like we were decimated by this crisis. And so that planted the seed when I was in high school of there was a contradiction of how I see the world and a little bit of where this power base is. And then as I got into school and got a little bit more access, it was really about learning the Black liberation tradition that then had me be grounded, one, in what structural racism is, and how that is inextricably linked to capitalism and corporate power. And so as I studied the history, whether it's W.B. Du Bois, Ella Baker, Angela Davis, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Huey Newton, the list goes on and on, they all named our economic system as central to the harm, to the incarceration, to the police violence, and then learning the history of redlining and the fact that the game has been rigged this entire time. And some of the mythology, I think, of meritocracy that we sometimes passively buy into in financial literacy space was breaking down for me. And so I'll end with this. I think what transformed me is I think I was passively internalizing two mythologies. One, and they're basically related. They're basically two expressions of the same thing. One of the things we say a lot, or at least we said a lot in our space, my mother's generation was, we don't have a certain amount of knowledge and we haven't been doing the right thing historically. And like white people sit at the table and talk about stocks and investing, and like there is this like gap in knowledge and, you know, rational economic activity between our communities. And what I learned is that is actually like not true, that like historically over the last century, Black people start more businesses than anybody. There just has not been the same access to capital. Most businesses, small businesses fail. Most small communities are experiencing some of these consequences. There is just real systemic issues, a la the number one wealth building notion for all of America, homeownership, was not accessible to Black people. Or for example, in our Inglewood community, or Chicago community, I'm sorry to ramble, there are people who bought homes in 1970, and relative to inflation, that, you know, banks have basically devalued their assets. So that's a generation of wealth that we're taught historically that if you buy a home, it goes up for everybody, but that has not been true for us. And that is not our fault, right? There is real reasons why that is happening, and people are benefiting from it. And that is who the F in fetch is, the financial service industry. And so this idea of deficiency was one mythology, that learning that Black people have been brilliant, have been excellent, have been poor, have been the whole spectrum this whole time. And then secondly, learning that it's related to this myth that there is a pathology amongst our people, and the reason why we don't function right economically. And so learning more about Black liberation work, which is the tradition I see myself in, taught me about capitalism. And then I had such a already clear view of corporations. I knew how to study their balance sheets. I knew how to look at 10, 20, 30-year trends. And so my last semester, I did to go back to where I started, I did a study of the financial crisis. So this is now 2014, and I'm able to look back at 08 and 09. And it wasn't just like, you know, too big to fail or just like an accident. It was very clear to me that there was something violent happening, and that this violence is also connected to war globally and policing and militarism domestically, policing and incarceration domestically, and that this is predatorial. And so I'll stop here with my question is like, we need to ask them to do better things, but that our whole society needs transformational systemic change. And so how do we as participants or engagers of this system work to just name those contradictions, even though we don't have all the answers? Because I certainly don't. All right, I'm sorry, I'm long-winded.
No, I mean, everything you said, I needed to hear. And you are the best person to have this conversation with, because I can ask tough questions and sit back and hear from your perspective what that is. What comes to mind though, especially in regards to this space we've created, hashtag My Investing Story. A lot of us are Black, not all of us. Shout out to Am Newman on. But so many of us are in our own stuff.
Yeah.
So many of us are still slaves because we have debt. So many of us are just trying to finally take the blinders off because of how we've been taught to be consumers. So what are your words of wisdom or insight, perspective to people that are listening that have their own shit that they want to correct? They are paying off, you know, student loans, mortgage early. You know, they're trying to become financially free themselves. How can they do that and still contribute to the whole of Black people, to the challenging of the system?
And all people.
Even in small ways. You know, how can we take baby steps in our lane, but collectively?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I want to be humble and like, I'm figuring this out too. And if I had like a clear-cut solution, I would have like sent y'all it. You know what I'm saying? Like I would have definitely been sharing the goods. So I'm struggling and working through this with the team. To get to my biggest vision of what I think we should do is like understand that this is a collective project, and that we are all struggling. Like, actually, I even want to slow down and just like take a deep breath, because I think those of us who have this knowledge are very powerful, and we try to just like push through and be like, you know, we're gonna do it. But I want us to like take a deep breath of like, we are in a historic economic recession right now, and a lot of people are hurting. Even those of us who are doing okay and have the privilege to be able to like have this conversation, our peoples are not okay, right? Like our society right now is very vulnerable economically, and that a lot of people are being hurt. So I don't want to skate past that. And so I think that the solution is collective land relationships as a first basis, right? I think we need to be able to sustain shelter for people. The ways in which financial institutions or other communities or other interests are profiting off like housing instability or that fear of like paying our mortgage off, paying off rent. How do we work together, whether it's through capital investment, whether it's through political work, whether it's through other redistributive efforts, invest in land trust or cooperative, even ownership, like stewardship of land so that we can build community. And in that, we actually, I think, need to like work on reducing our collective expenses. So how do we, share our resources? How do we carpool? How do we share childcare? How do we make sure our elders, and I think we got somebody talking. We can mute Doretha, maybe. It's coming up in my ear. Yeah, how do we have collective like elder care, youth care? That is the ideal that I look towards. And so I think the investment club can be a model of not how do I just only pay off my debt or start my singular enterprise and look at it through a very individualistic. How do we start to build communal goals as well? So that's my my ideal. I feel like there was a second part to your question that I forgot.
I think the best second part of my question could be rephrased. What does a conscious investor look like to you? Mm-hmm. I'm an investor. I invest in my Roth IRA. I invest in my Roth 401k. I also own individual stocks. I'm also starting to go to share owner meetings. I'm also starting to get informed on, who are the board of directors, when I vote for them, when I vote for the policies. I remember as a child, and this was the beautiful thing. This was the beautiful thing to me about starting as a child, owning one share of stock in Kellogg's. I was voting before the age of 18. And I took that very seriously. When I got my proxy and my annual statement in the mail, I filled out my vote, my ballot, and I mailed it in, every single one. And I remember on one of them, it may have been Kellogg's, it may have been another company, that actually asked the question about transparency. These things, to me, from the perspective of a share owner, it's amazing to me how transparent voting is as a corporation owner, as opposed to a US citizen. I mean, they lay it out in that proxy. They'll say, vote yes or no to disclose investment in apartheid South Africa, or pollutants, or what. I mean, it's very clear language. And even though they may say, well, the board recommends no, you could vote yes. And to me, that is real change. There is no electoral college in that. They count every single vote. And to me, I think that was the conscious awakening of, well, what if a lot of us voted for that type of transparency? Because I mean, even outside of the world we live in terms of community organizing, in their world, there being corporations, hedge funds, there's a thing called hostile takeover. They do this to themselves.
They do.
They will buy up, right? Don't they? They will buy up this ownership they will do a hostile takeover to get what they want and do what they want. And I think that type of awareness of strategies and tactics is something that can really inform us in what we decide to do. Because if they can do it, then I definitely think we could do it for the purposes that serve us. So back to us, I'm going to just ask the question, what does a conscious investor kind of look like in your mind?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think I will break it down to like three metrics. I think it would be a relationship to labor and working people. Secondly, to land and environment, and then I would say probably lastly, a relationship to militarism. So within that, again, I say, militarism abroad, but definitely understanding incarceration and policing as a form of militarism. Uh, um, so first, I think the first and the last one actually coincide. So what you mentioned is actually really beautiful. You're talking about organizing. And so how can we organize people and then organize our resources to participate in our institutions as a way to shift their incentives and their interests, which I do think, from how I understand voting to work, that it's weighted based off ownership, that is a very long game, but I do think it's worthwhile. So first, I think it's just an understanding.
Especially considering how many people don't fill out their proxies.
Yeah,
So all
yeah,
the little ones add up, just like pennies add up, all the little ones
yeah,
add up. But go ahead.
yeah. Yeah, so I'm not as active in the space anymore. So I would love to look up more of the process. Um, so in that, I would say advocating for workers. One, it's just known that like across the board, like our society is in trouble. And so over the last 40 years, profits of the market have gone up exponentially. And relative to inflation, wages have been stagnant. So there's been actually like an extraction of profit from labor productivity. Productivity has been going up, wages have been going straight, and that is causing inequity, imbalance in our society. So understanding that it's not even just like a charitable thing, that actually is economically sound to make sure that your consumer base and your worker base, if markets is all that you're concerned about, are sustaining. And right now, this hoarding of wealth that corporations are facilitating and manifesting, is creating real discord. And so one of the ways that redistribution can happen easily, is through increased payment to workers, particularly from the bottom up. So I would be really diligent around executive salary and executive bonuses, because they usually do both out their mouth, is saying we can't pay people more, while those same people are paying themselves more by the billions when you collect it all together. And so, yeah, so tag that piece into labor, and I'm going to come back to it when I talk about militarization. Secondly, it's an understanding of, for the different companies, where are their primary resources? What are their modes of production? Because the ways in which, for example, we could talk about, so I'm very heavily invested, Apple and Nike I'm not as diversified as I used to teach. And a lot of my growth and my compounding went in Apple and Nike. So Apple, for example, the continent of Africa is where they get their materials, and they do it in ways that disrupt those societies. Or, for example, just this year, Tesla was calling for a coup in South America to be able to extract resources. Elon Musk said it on Twitter, like, let's overthrow a government to be able to take their resources to build these electronic cars, right? And so understanding that, one, this creates human discord, but this extraction, particularly in the fossil fuel industry, which all production is almost dependent upon, our planet will not be livable if corporate power does not change the way in which it is collectively addressing our resources and polluting the environment. And so getting investment and buy-in of like, this is not just about being just in like the abstract. This is about, if you look 10 years out, if you're talking about long-term growth, we are going to be in an unsustainable place if we continue to try to extract profit in these degenerative ways. That's number two. And then lastly, militarism. So, you know, we've been in Iraq and Afghanistan and 9 other countries now for the last 20 years. And that has been in many ways funded by corporations. ExxonMobil, you know, as an example, is very much on making sure that we have more boots on the ground, more troops are intervening in these spaces. And that has consequence, that has real consequence on the planet, on the world, but also on our society. But I would say more importantly, for people who are concerned with social justice, we have gone through this year, 2020 was the most active political year in human history, and it was mostly around the effects of mass incarceration. And so when you talk about movement, a lot of it can be traced back to Trayvon Martin. And so I bring him up to talk about how his killer was let off. This is Florida, for most folks are talking about. The Stand Your Ground law, which we know was instituted and legislated for explicitly racist purposes, was designed by ALEC, the American Legislative and Executive Council. I forget you can look up ALEC, ALEC. And this is a body of the major corporations of the S&P 500 and the Dow Jones, and politicians of both houses of Congress and local state houses that work on policy. And so the policy to discriminate against immigrants in Arizona and the Stand Your Ground policy, from which George Zimmerman was exonerated, was designed by corporations. And then also the investment into prison labor. And so many of our corporations right now, that if we were just having an investment club meeting and we're looking at their, you know, making our old school stock selection guide, would be doing good on paper. We can get our 15%, we could double our money in 5 years. And then we as people as privileged are then benefiting while they are taking those profits and building prisons with them, building more, investing in legislation to criminalize people in a way to control the labor market. Because in terms of macro theory, as someone who studied economics, our system depends on surplus labor, that is unemployed people. Our system depends in order to control the prices. And I'll stop here because we're talking about earnings, right? We want to see EPS go up every time. What are earnings? Earnings is R minus E, revenue minus expenses. What are some of those expenses? Some of those expenses are taxes. So Amazon doesn't pay any taxes. Jeff Bezos doesn't pay any taxes while we are experiencing bankruptcies. Expense is also labor. So what that means is it is in the interest, profit goes up when we pay people less. And a way to be able to pay people less is make sure that there's a bunch of unemployed people, or there are people in prisons that will work for a few cents an hour, $1 a month. And it is legalized slavery based off the 13th Amendment. And so for me, at a moral place, once I started to, I think the new Jim Crow was a good like text that kind of opened up by Michelle Alexander. I'm sorry, Michelle, I know I'm supposed to give you books before I said them.
We'll catch up. We'll catch up.
Yeah. But the 13th Amendment, just for everyone to make sure we know, I think it's important to say that slavery nor involuntary servitude in the United States nor any of its jurisdictions shall exist, comma, except for its punishment for a crime. And so what I teach people now is that we need to understand that every day that you have drawn breath in the United States of America, which is controlled by corporate power, you have been living in a place where slavery is constitutionally legal. And there are people in chains picking crops. There are people in chains working on factories, and they're working for free, and they're being abused, and they can't protect themselves, and they can't organize. And that's most of the reason why they are there. And the impact of that is my community is decimated. So I have been able to get a 6-figure portfolio over this 20 years of investing. But I need more people to be able to address some of these contradictions, because I don't think that my benefiting or my being able to build some generational wealth is actually addressing this system that is harming people at a faster rate than I'm able to grow my portfolio.
Yes. Anybody that owns a business or anybody that owns a business or looks at a business income statement should know that labor, which they now call it human capital, but that's a sign of the times. Labor is going to be a company's highest expense. And going to Damon's point, this is why when you know the formula, sales or revenue minus expenses equals profit, then you understand that there are a variety of ways in which you can increase your profit. You can either do it by increasing sales, you can do it by decreasing expenses, you can do it by a combination of the two. And so I do want to say that though, because I don't think people really know. I studied accounting, so from my perspective, I don't think people really know how much labor is from the perspective of a business owner and from a financial perspective, and also why corporations and organizations are so reluctant to give people's raises. It really demands a shift in consciousness. And we have our ideas about how things could be. But one question I do have, because, back in the day, I still watch documentaries, but I remember coming across one that talked about co-ops.
Yes.
And then the studying of other countries and how they, again, I'm in Senegal, and it is very clear how important family and people are over and above money. And so I am being able to live temporarily in an environment, in an alternate reality that is opening my mind to a different way of being. And I told my host family today, you all actually have it better than we do in the States because of what their money can afford them.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that they can house all of their family in one house and help in one house, and we eat together. I mean, coming from America and being a descendant of enslaved Africans, my experience is very different than what I'm observing here, where, the help eats with the family, and there is no denigration of the person themselves. They are all Senegalese, they are all Muslim, they are all children of God. They just serve different functions. And so, bringing it back to my question, I'm sure you've been studying other ways of organizing society. What can you share with us as we start to reimagine? Because I think everybody listening is already doing the steps or planning to do the steps for their own financial freedom within the US. I know I am. Trying to have a portfolio that allows me to work part-time, not full-time, because I just found out about the NAP ministry, and being Black, being poor, even being uneducated, those things cause a lot of stress. It can cause you to overwork, it can cause you to barely keep up, it can cause you to just be
Breaks down
beaten
your
down
body,
mentally,
breaks down your mental health. Absolutely.
everything, mentally, physically, emotionally. And so as we have a certain awareness, or I should say awakening, what can you inform us about other societies, other ways of being, other ways of organizing society, so that we start to be aware of how we can reimagine? Because I think the era that we live in the last couple of years, it has opened us up to be more participant citizens. And I think people want to know, how can they do for self and do for others and do for community? But we just kind of we need to see something different.
So I want to start with saying, like, the seeds are there, but we still have to create something that has not yet been fully manifested when we're talking about in our space. So I'm sorry, Michelle, here goes another book text that I didn't think about before. But a really important piece is Collective Courage, A History of African American Cooperative Economic Thought and Practice by Jessica Gordon Imbrand. And that book goes through about 100 years of the ways in which organizing around cooperative economics has always been connected to the freedom and well-being and liberation of Black people of all social justice, anti-oppression, moving type spaces. And so that's a really important book. And what she shows is how many examples have existed, how many have sustained, how many have been successful, but naming that the way in which our dominant market functions, it is aggressive, it is predatory, and it works to create the conditions for cooperative models to not succeed or to be really under a lot of pressure. So like the paradigm or the paradox has been you need a lot of capital to sustain an entity that we're trying to work to like help build people out of poverty. So that's why I think the where we are, where we're talking about this investing club as like a transition space to basically be able to siphon off corporate profits into communal institutions, into communal enterprise and communal spaces as a way to protect people from the market. So Collective Courage is a text that I think can spell it out much better than I can. But definitely around the world, in Spain, I always mess up how to pronounce it, but the largest corporation in Spain, I think it's Michigan. I'm real bad with my Spanish, but that's one of the most important, I think, global examples. There's a lot of examples in South America of cooperative economics. So you have noticed something that like US capitalism and cooperative economics have been in a different type of tension that doesn't exist in the same way in other places of the world. And so I think being global is always really important. But yes, I think one of the things that we can also advocate for is like we can start our small enterprises. So, you know, we can start our corner retail shops or our own grocery markets or some type of trade or some type of manufacturing that is cooperatively owned. But I think what the real project is, and this goes to your first question about board membership and showing up to shareholders meetings, how can we actually create passageways, processes, entities within corporations to transfer ownership into the people that make it work, right? Because basically what happens now is a board who's not connected to the day-to-day processes, who's not actually present for the decisions, has all of the ultimate power. And so what would it look like if, for example, workers in Detroit had to be consulted before they decided to close down factories to look for cheaper labor elsewhere in the world? How do we organize as shareholders to say, hey, we actually, whether it's through, you know, a new type of pension fund or a new type of mutual fund or some type of ownership, how do we actually grant ownership to those who don't have access to it? For those who don't make enough to be able to save substantially. Oh, I think we lost it, Yanni. I'm trying to finish the answer though. How do we, for those who don't have access to income and save, how do we make sure that they have some type of ownership or stake in these corporate spaces that already exist that are so huge? So what would it look like if Walmart long-term employees had 10% ownership and a third, you know, board representation, as opposed to just being looked at as an expense that they're trying to control and discipline? So that's like a small, I think, internal transformation that don't mean we got to burn it all down. That could put us in a little bit better place, I think. You're back. That was quick. You came back quick. You jumped right back in there.
Man,
That's
I'm
smooth.
like puppet master over here.
Yeah.
But I will say though that again, in my own fantasy, and maybe in 100 years, we can make this a reality. You know, there is, I think that if we know the ways, we can create what we want. Because the time for asking somebody to create it for us, to do right by us, to apologize, to do better, that time has never come and it is been gone.
Yeah.
And so I think that creatively as a people, especially people of African descent and the brilliance we brought over to build this country, we give, if given enough time and space and rest and imagination, we can recreate what works best for us. And that is, I'm so glad you shared how other countries and societies are doing it, because I think that that first strategy I mentioned in the beginning, we could create our own co-op, but it requires us taking the individual action collectively to do it. We may not even need to name it, but the actions themselves will create what I think we need.
Yeah.
We do have someone, Tylene, you have your hand up. I wanted you to text me your question. Um, I don't, I haven't seen it. So we're going to do we don't generally do this, but Tylene, if you want to come off, um, okay. If you want to come off mute and share your question / comment to Damon, now is the time. Ah, okay. So I guess she wants me to, so this was already put in the chat, but I'll read it aloud for the people. And shout out to Talene for adding facts and research to the conversation. She said that Gallup and the Brookings Institution published a report in 2018 that showed homes in majority Black neighborhoods were valued 23% lower than similar homes in white areas. Researchers estimated the lower appraisals cost Black homeowners 156 billion in home equity. And then she gives the link, wbur.org. And anybody that has seen Raising in the Sun from an artistic perspective can get a sense of why that is. But I think Damon mentioned it, and it should be stated because it is a real reality. And if you are not aware of this doesn't mean that you have to get mad about it, but I think that by being aware of it, it can help you learn how to move forward. And let me say this before I say what Damon said. Even though somebody views you one way, does not mean that you are that way. And so we know financially in this country, we are not paid the same. Our houses are not valued the same, and all of the other economic things when we do comparisons between Blacks and whites. Um, but that does not mean that it is not worth the same, right? So I do think that that is a distinction that I need to state for people to hear. And that is also why it's important to become self-educated along both of these lines, because in that type of situation, and for anybody that's bought a house and anybody that's what's called a value investor, value investing is this: paying 50 cents for something today that you know is worth $1. Paying 50 cents for something today that you know is worth $1. And so I just want to not leave us with that, but with the right hat on, I think we can look at ourselves and look at what we have as a value opportunity, because there's no way that we can own what we own on our side of town, and when somebody else owns it, it's actually worth more. Because if you knew what they knew, you knew the real worth of it, not just what they wanted to hand it over to you. And again, once you understand that type of concept, it can translate into every area of your life. But I'm going to restate what Damon talked about a little earlier. What type of capitalist society do we live in, Damon?
Racial capitalist society.
Yes. And so that in and of itself creates, um, I've just lost the word, but the second word is opportunity. Because depending on the perspective we have, we can start to take advantage of the the, the discrimination that a racist capitalistic society presents and affords us. So with that, um, Damon's Instagram is at Damon, Damon underscore A as in apple, F as in Frank. And I'm going to check in with Miss Ann before I give you the last words, Damon.
I listen. I basically said all I had to say in the beginning of the show. I just want to remind everybody that Ione and I are volunteers with Better Investing. We're not selling any products or services. We are simply volunteers. This show is entitled "My Investing Story," and Damon just shared hashtag his investing story. And I am actually reached out to Talim when I realized the name of the Ujama Investment Club from it's at least 20 years ago, right? 20 plus years ago. And I'll talk with her about that later because the name of her business is also called Ujama. So I invited her to come on, please, so she could hear your show presentation and your investing story. I am so glad that uh, we had an opportunity to connect over 20 years ago, and you're exactly where you're supposed to be.
Thank you
Exactly.
so much.
Exactly. So thank you so very much. And it was great having you on the show. Thank you, Ian.
And thank you, Damon, for doing the work that you are doing because it is necessary and it is important and it helps inform us and allow us to have a better quality of life. So with that, I'll leave you with the last words.
Yeah. So, I just want to name that I come to this conversation as a part of a movement, and so part of my transition. I talked a lot about school, but I graduated in 2014, and so a lot of my transition has been in communal space, in a liberatory space, particularly that was birthed after the death of Mike Brown and the uprising in Ferguson, and have been a part of the work that is, you know, talking about transforming society as a whole. And that's what this space, this investing story pushed me towards, is how do we not just look at finance, but look at finance as part of the economy? And how do we not just look at the economy as isolated, but as a part of a larger functioning society? And so from there, all I push and all I'm advocating for everybody is solidarity. And so that when we see folks that have not yet gained some of this knowledge or some of this access or are not privileged in our capital system, do not have the same access to capital, understand that we are taught based off notions of class to separate ourselves, to blame people for their predicaments, but understand that we are in collectively a lot of trouble right now. And so the answer to that trouble is solidarity, working together, taking care of your people. And I think I just want to also name, because we didn't get too much into it, that some of that work will be political, right? That, that some of the work of how our economy and corporations function is how we gather and organize, but also how our larger society makes decisions. And so if people don't have access to education, if people don't have access to healthcare, they probably aren't going to be in a place to save 10 to 15% of a sustainable income and invest and build generational wealth. And there is a generational reason why people don't have that access. And so in all of our missions and all of our journeys, just work to be in as much solidarity with our people as we can, because we're really going to need it. But on the flip side, I feel like we've been too doom and gloom in this conversation, and maybe it's just the feeling of the day, because this is an intense day in history. There is so much opportunity. There is so much happening. Millions of young people have taken to the streets wanting a better world, wanting more resources in their communities, wanting to not be marginalized and oppressed by the police and other state forces. And that vision of the world where people have what they need, I think is connected to your work and what this investing story is about. So I think what I'm pushing for in my last words is, how do we go from my investing story to our investing story? And how do we not only invest in institutions, how do we figure out how to invest in people and in communities? And that feels like asking those questions will get us some answers for a better world. So thank you so much for inviting me and having me here in your space.
Thank you. And having you here has been phenomenal. And you are one of a kind. I'm going to say that. And I'm
Thank
so
you.
glad that we had you here as the first guest of the new year and as a celebration for Kwanzaa and all of the principles it stands for, because 2021 is going to be a new ride. And
Ashe.
so, yes, Ashe,
Yes,
we are
yes.
moving forward. So peace be upon you, my brother, and
And love
everyone
back to you.
listening. Have a good night. Peace.